Oh, hey guys, how's it going? I was just, fending off some urges. If you find yourself struggling with some urges, you just gotta give them the old kung fu slap and, put them in their place, okay? Sometimes when we're struggling with our urges, we feel like we're getting beat up and getting our butt kicked and, it sucks, but there's no reason for any of that, okay? You know how in pretty much every martial arts movie and kung fu movie, there's always a scene where the master gets attacked, and the master just owns them. He could be drinking a cup of tea and reading a book and fighting off 3 enemies at once without even, paying attention to them. He's just going crazy, and it's not even an effort for him. Well, that's how I want you to handle your urges. I want you to just effortlessly put them in their place. You might be thinking, well, I'm not a kung fu master, how am I going to be able to do that? But the thing is, you are a master. You're the master of yourself, you're the master of your actions, and you're the master of your life. So you can take all of these things that are threatening your position of control in your own life and put them in their place. So go ahead and give it the old whoosh. So welcome to the Sacred Sexuality Project, where we help you live a higher expression of your sexuality. And today, what I want to do is just kind of have a fireside chat with you all and explain my reasoning as to why I did NoFap and why even after 115 days, I'm going to continue to do NoFap and why I pretty much never really see myself stopping. Now, I just want to emphasize here that these are my personal reasons, and I'm not trying to push them on anyone else. I'm just trying to share with you my perspectives and thoughts so that, maybe it gives you a little clarity on what you really believe and what you think. So to get right down to it, the reason I wanted to do NoFap was because porn was causing a tremendous amount of disharmony in me and my life. The problem was that I couldn't be who I wanted to be when I was watching porn, when it was a regular part of my life. The way I understand it, there's 2 big parts of being who you want to be. You have your actions and you have your reactions. And both of those got screwed up by porn for me. So on the action side, the first big thing was that I couldn't act the way I wanted to, in regards to my relationship with my girlfriend. I've been dating my girlfriend now for over 4 years, and when I was on porn, just the very fact that I was watching porn was an action that went against everything that I wanted with her. I wanted her to be the number 1 woman in my life, and I wanted her to be all that I needed and more. And it wasn't, and she wasn't that. And it wasn't because she was doing anything wrong or she wasn't good enough. It was because I was acting in a way that said she wasn't good enough. The fact that you're watching porn and you have a girlfriend, that's basically saying that, she's not enough, you need additional stimulation. And that didn't match my higher ideals of what I thought a relationship was really about and how things should really work in that regard. So there was a lot of guilt there. The second big issue I had was really just a moral one with pornography. I don't believe that it's morally a good thing. I don't think that it portrays a good expression of sexuality. I think it's a very shallow and debasing sort of medium, and I think that those who watch in it and those who engage in it are hurting themselves. I'm not trying to pass judgment on those individuals, but I don't think that they're setting themselves up for the truest level of happiness and fulfillment in their lives. So, being a part of that, it just was contrary to what I believed and, what I held to be true. And the final thing in the action category was that I had an inability to do work, And when I say do work, it wasn't that I was lazy and, didn't get stuff done. It was that I could only work if I was motivated by fear. If I could only do a paper if I had a deadline coming up. I could never do it before. So I would procrastinate like crazy. And what I realize now, the issue was that I was afraid of discomfort. I would use porn as a way of modifying my mood and making me feel better and, letting me put things off that I should be doing. And, porn gave me the distraction I needed to make that happen. And I didn't quite understand it all till I really started NoFap, but I knew that they were connected somehow. And because of that, I was like, you know what, I gotta cut this out. So on the other side of my issues with porn is the reaction side. And by reaction, I mean like the kinds of responses that rise up inside of you without, any kind of voluntary prompting. So what do I mean by this? Well, basically, porn trains your mind to look at people as sexual objects. It trains your mind to be constantly evaluating people based upon, how sexy and how hot they are. And when you apply this to a practical situation, like it comes down to the fact that every woman you meet, you start to look at sexually, and like you just start to go into fantasizing mode, and just like, someone you never met before, you're having sex with them in your head, and that's screwed up. I personally think that's screwed up. I think that's wrong to use their image in that way without, their permission or their knowledge. And then also, like, what does it do for you? It does nothing for you. What does fantasy do for you? It does nothing for you. Porn trains your mind to create this false reality, like all the time. And when you build that false reality up and you rely on it as a thing to, give you a little reprieve or a little excitement or a little relaxation, whatever the heck you want to call it, when you rely on that, it increasingly detaches you from reality. And the more detached you get from reality, the harder it is to actually deal with reality. And the thing is, reality is what's real, and that's what you got to deal with. So I didn't like how porn made me have these reactions to people and emotions that, I couldn't control. Like I couldn't control the fact that when I got stressed out, I wanted to jerk off. Like that, I didn't like that feeling. Didn't like that feeling of being in a prison almost with my libido. So this leads into the next idea of like why I thought, porn was bad for me. Basically, I recognized I was using it as an escape. And, I would use it when I was angry, upset, bored, frustrated, horny, whatever, and I would run away from those feelings by engaging in porn. I've talked about this a lot in my other videos, so I'm not going to spend much time on it here, but ultimately you get into a running match with reality where you're constantly trying to push things away and modify your mood with stimulation. And it doesn't work, and eventually the real problems pile up until, you can't escape at all, and you're just spending your entire time running, and life sucks. Now, one of the most difficult things that I had to face in my journey to, take porn out of my life was the issue that I treated sex as a need. I treated sex and orgasm as a need in the same way that, food and sleep are a need. And society perpetuates this idea. It really kind of makes you think that if you're not getting laid, like, are you going to die? Like, you might die. You should go see a doctor. You're not getting laid. And, when you don't have the option to get laid, then porn is the next best thing. You're like, I know many guys who go into NoFap, they call it hard mode because they're not having sex. Well, I mean, it's not hard mode. That's just life. You can't always be having sex. And what this does is ends up adding unnecessary constraints on your happiness. When you feel like you have to do something, or you actually do have to do something, then that becomes an obstacle. It becomes something that you have to contend with and satisfy in order for you to be, healthy and at peace. So like, for instance, food and sleep are huge constraints. Think about how much time you spend eating and sleeping. They take a huge amount of energy and time, and you always need to schedule around them. You always need to cater to them, because if you don't get them, you get screwed up. And when we treat sex the same way, it just becomes an obstacle. It becomes just, a pain in the butt. And then you start getting into all the issues of like, well, how are you going to satisfy it? And that's where the unhealthy behaviors start to come in. So not only did I treat sex like a need instead of a want, which it really is, what I realized was that my self-worth and my self-esteem was heavily dependent upon, how much sex I was having, and, whether I was being sexually satisfied. Now, to be clear, I don't think the desire for sex is a bad thing. It's a natural and very powerful force, and, we need to learn how to healthily manage it in our lives. I think the issue is that people think that the only way you can manage it is through some sort of genital stimulation, either solo or with a partner. In reality, though, that's not necessarily the case. There are ways to express your sexuality and to be satisfied and, not repress your sexuality that don't involve those kinds of things. And if you're interested in hearing a video about that, then, let me know. And I can talk to you guys about how to express your sexuality without some sort of genital stimulation involved. And, this can help you avoid the whole issue of repressing your sexuality and all that bad stuff. But to sum it all up, though, I was just really tired of having to contend with and satisfy my libido. It was like my sex drive was this big old bully who, used to come over and threaten to take my lunch money and, push me in the dirt. And I was tired of it because trying to satisfy this never-ending hunger, this never fully satisfied hunger, just was screwing up my life. So I knew it was the time to change, and I started NoFap. So that's why I did NoFap, and it took a lot of time. I was probably trying to do this really for, on and off for a number of years. But it wasn't until I actually found the NoFap forum on Reddit that I kind of had the support and commitment that I needed to really go through a reboot. I didn't even know what a reboot was before, to be honest with you. But here's why I'm never going back to watching porn or even to masturbating. Because, well, first of all those issues that I mentioned, I don't want to go back to that crap. Okay, I want that behind me, and I want to be on to a new phase of my life. But more than that, I've noticed that my life is just so much better. So before, my sex drive was like this raging bull that I was trapped in a small room with, okay? And I was just like, I would do whatever it wanted, pretty much. And if I tried to fight, I'd get my ass kicked. But now, it's like, that raging bull is now pulling my chariot to Awesome Town, okay? It feels like my sexuality is now something that I can transmute and express in a higher, more fuller way to live a happier and more fulfilling life. It's clear to me that our sexuality has tremendous power, and learning how to harness it is one of the keys to really getting the most out of life. So for example, my focus and energy are at the highest consistent level that they have ever been in my entire life. I can sit down and work for 10, 12, 13 hours if I need to. And I'm doing it with passion, I am filled with all right, let's get this done kind of energy, And what I'm realizing it is if you're not using your sexuality to make love to your hand, okay, you can use that energy to make love to the world. You fill the world with your energetic seed, and it's a beautiful thing. It's learning how to make love to the moment, even. And it's a expression of sexuality that is pure and good, and it's entirely generative. If you think about sex, the reason for it is to create. It's something that is used to create, new life or new something. And masturbation and porn, they don't create anything other than problems in a lot of ways. So by learning how to transmute that energy, we can create so much more in our life, with our passions, within our interests, within, our families and connections, and all of these things that mean so much to us. And another thing that I just have to mention is that my relationship with my girlfriend is better than it has ever been, ever, okay? When I started NoFap, we decided to, stop having sex, okay? And it's really hard sometimes still, but we're not going to have sex until we're married. Basically, my take on it is that, you can't healthily live with sex until you learn how to healthily live without it. And by learning how to live without sex, we learned how to live together as, just people. And don't worry, I'm not trying to push this idea of, chastity or abstinence on any of you. I know many of you are actually hoping to have sex, really badly. So I'm just trying to put forth, what I feel is truth for me. And, I want to help you guys find your own truth as well. So that's my show. I hope you guys found it helpful or interesting, or maybe just helped you get clarity on your own reasons for doing NoFap and what you need to stay strong. If you didn't catch the live hangout I did on Google Plus on Wednesday, then you might want to check that out. I've uploaded it to my YouTube channel. I brought Kevin Chin on, who's also a YouTuber on here, and we kind of had a nice discussion over how to deal with urges and things like that. So check it out if you're interested. But otherwise, subscribe, and stay clean, guys.